How is it possible that an idol described as the biggest revenue contributor of a giant agency has instead become the center of anger from his own fans? Was there something we deliberately failed to see all this time? Or is everything only now beginning to unravel? That question exploded in the digital public sphere within hours, spreading from one post to another, from one account to thousands, until it ultimately became a global debate that could no longer be dismissed as mere fandom drama. The world of K-pop, which for so long appeared glamorous, measured, and controlled, suddenly looked fragile when financial figures, promotional decisions, and fans' sense of justice collided. At the center of that vortex stood a name too big to ignore, Jungkook. It all began with a post on Platform X that seemed simple, almost ordinary, if not for the impact that followed. The account at @Jungkook responded to accusations from another account claiming that HYBE had wasted funds on Jungkook's solo career. That accusation, which used the derogatory term chkak, immediately triggered an emotional response.
Yet instead of replying with empty anger, the fan delivered a single short sentence in Korean that has since been quoted thousands of times. 하이브의 돈을 탕진한 건 정국이 아니지.
It wasn't Jungkook who squandered HYBE's money. The sentence sounded simple, almost flat. But behind it lay a massive claim that made ARMY fall silent for a moment before eventually erupting. The claim that Jungkook, without melon banners, without massive documentary posters, without visual promotions on par with other members, was in fact the biggest revenue contributor to HYBE during the 2023 to 2024 period. A paradox that felt illogical to many fans, yet grew stronger as the numbers began to speak. The discussion did not stop at visual promotion. The name of the FIFA World Cup 2022 soon surfaced, reviving collective memories of the historic moment when Jungkook stood on the opening stage of the world's biggest sporting event, singing Dreamers alongside Fahad Al-Kubaisi. For a long time, many believed this was the result of HYBE's lobbying and grand strategy. However, a claim reintroduced by fans suggested something far more surprising. The offer came directly from FIFA to Jungkook, with officials from the organization contacting HYBE in the United States merely as an administrative channel. If this is true, then the narrative about who was lifted up by the agency and who actually carried his own name onto the global stage begins to waver. To this point, ARMY's emotions shifted direction. This was no longer about defending one member over another, but about power relations between artist and agency. When the account at @Nightoff7Kings shared a video clip from HYBE's financial report, the discussion escalated to a more serious, almost academic level. Jungkook's concert documentary titled I Am Still was explicitly cited as one of the main contributors to the company's increase in content revenue. The film reached #1 at the Japanese box office and #2 in North America in September 2025, an achievement that is rare, even nearly impossible, for an Asian artist concert documentary. The figures that emerged were not small, could not be denied, and could not be obscured. Global revenue of $18.5 million made it the highest-grossing concert documentary according to Kofis, surpassing works by Suga and even major groups like 17. In the eyes of the industry, this was a monumental achievement. In the eyes of fans, it was concrete proof. And this is where anger began to find its footing. If Jungkook was capable of generating numbers like that, if his name alone could move box offices across countries, if his mere presence was enough to raise the value of a project, then why did the circulating narrative claim that HYBE had spent money on him? That question hung in the digital air, typed repeatedly in various languages, including Indonesian, where ARMY's fanbase is said to be the largest in the world. HYBE's own financial reports seem to both muddy and clarify the situation. In fiscal year 2024, the company recorded record revenue of KRW 2.25 trillion, around $1.58 billion, up 4% from the previous year. This figure appeared amid the absence of BTS's activities as a complete group due to mandatory military service. Profits did drop by 40%, but this was precisely where sharper scrutiny emerged. Solo album sales by BTS members, including Jungkook, became the main support. A total of 43.6 million album units were sold by HYBE artists in 2023, double the previous year. A surge that would have been impossible without the individual appeal of the members. However, One detail made many ARMY fall silent before eventually becoming angry. BTS's overall contribution fell below 20% in 2024. For industry observers, this might be just a statistic, but for fans, it felt like a blaring alarm. If BTS as a group contributed less than 1/5 of the revenue, then who filled that gap? And if Jungkook was being mentioned as the largest contributor, why did the promotional treatment he received seem disproportionate? Here, emotion began to mix with a sense of injustice. Discussions turned into debates, debates turned into accusations, and accusations evolved into narratives of sabotage. The hashtag Jungkook solo ruling on her resurfaced, bringing with it old stories about delayed solo projects, allegedly restricted opportunities to perform on major stages like the Super Bowl, and miscredited works that were never publicly clarified. What further intensified the situation was the fact that this was not a new conflict. On another side of the fandom, Jimin's fans had long voiced disappointment with HYBE. They complained about the agency's slow response to harassment faced by Jimin, the rejection of requests for additional music videos for his debut album Face, and the alleged absence of legal support. These two currents of frustration ultimately converged at the same point. A lack of trust in the agency's transparency. HYBE, to this day, has chosen silence. There has been no official statement, no clarification, no attempt to quell the intensifying emotions. This silence, rather than calming things down, has been read by some fans as confirmation. In the fast-paced world of K-pop, silence is often considered louder than words. In Indonesia, this conversation found especially strong resonance. Social media was filled with translations, analyses, snippets of financial reports, and comparisons of promotional treatment among members. The emotions that surfaced were not only anger, but also sadness and confusion. How could a fandom as massive as ARMY, long known for its solidarity, now be confronted with internal conflict triggered by trillions of won and managerial decisions behind the scenes? The first chapter of this story offers no answers, only open wounds and questions. Is Jungkook truly an unacknowledged money-making engine? Has HYBE failed to read the emotions of its own fandom? Or are we witnessing the most sensitive transitional phase in BTS's history, where the individual power of the members begins to challenge the old structures of the K-pop industry? One thing is certain: when financial figures collide with the emotional loyalty of millions of fans, the result is more than just an online debate. It is a storm still in motion, and its full impact has yet to be seen. For Jungkook's fans, the fact that he did not receive melon banners or massive documentary posters is not merely a matter of visual aesthetics or promotional style. In the K-pop ecosystem, these symbols are statements of power. A banner is not just advertising, but an institutional acknowledgement that an artist is being pushed, prioritized, and trusted as a main face. When the documentary I Am Still was able to set international box office records without such large-scale visual support, many ARMY began to ask with a bitter tone, was Jungkook truly supported, or was he instead left to walk on his own because his name was already strong enough? This question became even sharper when compared to the treatment of other members. Not to belittle anyone, but because these comparisons emerged organically in fan discussions. Some ARMY highlighted how certain solo projects received layered promotions, consistent content releases, and swift responses from the agency when negative issues arose. On the other hand, Jungkook is often portrayed as someone who still succeeds despite lacking maximum spotlight. This phrase may sound like praise, but for his devoted fans, it feels more like a veiled critique of management. The narrative of Jungkook's solo projects being delayed for nearly a decade resurfaced. Many recalled how, since BTS's early era, Jungkook was frequently referred to as the Golden Magne, a figure with extraordinary vocal potential, performance ability, and global appeal. Yet his solo project only truly gained full space after BTS entered a group hiatus due to mandatory military service. For some ARMY, this felt too late. For others, it felt deliberate, a strategy of restraint rather than encouragement. This anger found momentum when HYBE's financial reports were examined in greater detail by fans. Discussions that initially were emotional turned almost academic, complete with charts, translated reports, and year-by-year comparisons. The figure of 2.25 trillion won in company revenue was no longer just corporate pride, but emotional fuel. Because behind that number, profits had sharply declined. The absence of BTS as a full group was indeed a major factor, but it was precisely here that the role of solo members became crucial. Jungkook, through his solo album, global appearances, and documentary, emerged as one of the main pillars preventing a steeper decline. Yet instead of being openly celebrated, this contribution felt silent in the official narrative. There was no major campaign positioning him as the company's financial backbone. There was no explicit statement acknowledging that without Jungkook and other solo projects, HYBE's numbers might have looked very different. This situation triggered a more sensitive question. Was HYBE deliberately avoiding a narrative that highlighted one member too strongly in order to preserve BTS's collective image? If so, was that fair when financial reality showed an imbalance in contributions? This is where the conflict between group idealism and industry reality collided. BTS was built as a single entity, but the post-hiatus world forced the public to see them as individuals with differing levels of appeal and economic value. The 2022 FIFA World Cup became the strongest symbol of this conflict. Jungkook's appearance on the opening stage was not only a personal achievement, but also a historic moment for a Korean artist. However, claims that the offer came directly from FIFA, rather than being initiated by HYBE, made many ARMY feel that the agency too often rode on its artist's achievements. If Jungkook was indeed chosen because of his own reputation and global appeal, then the narrative of HYBE as the architect behind all success became questionable. Anger spread further when fans realized that criticism of HYBE was not coming from only one side. Jimin's fans, with their complaints about minimal legal support and promotion, seemed to reinforce the narrative that there were structural problems in how the agency handled BTS members' solo careers. Two groups of fans who should have been united now shared the same disappointment, even if in different contexts. This was no longer about Jungkook versus Jimin, but about trust in management. Social media in Indonesia became one of the most active arenas in this debate. Translations of financial reports, snippets of old interviews, and lengthy analyses circulated widely. Many Indonesian fans expressed both confusion and sadness. BTS has been a symbol of unity, yet industrial realities forced them to confront dynamics they never imagined. For some ARMY, seeing Jungkook described as a money-making engine without equivalent recognition felt like a betrayal of the values they had long defended. HYBE once again chose silence. There was no clarification regarding accusations of sabotage, no explanation of promotional strategies deemed unequal. This silence only allowed speculation to grow wilder. In fandom culture, silence is often interpreted as indirect admission or indifference. And for fans whose emotions had already reached a boiling point, it was the most easily combustible fuel. So, what happens when this emotional storm hasn't subsided, yet time moves toward a much larger moment, the return of BTS as a full group? That question now hangs in the minds of millions of ARMYs, not with the euphoria of the past, but with an unprecedented anxiety. For the first time, the hope for a reunion is wrapped not only in longing but also in demands. Demands for justice, honesty, and transparency from an agency that has grown into a global giant thanks to the name BTS, and specifically, thanks to individual contributions like those of Jungkook. Industry predictions suggest that BTS's return in the 2025 to 2026 period has the potential to boost revenue by up to $1.4 billion. This figure sounds fantastic, almost impossible, but that is precisely where the ARMY's unease lies. If one group can bring such a massive financial impact, how will the position of each member be placed? Will individual contributions again be submerged for the sake of a collective narrative, or will they finally be openly recognized as part of BTS's true strength? For fans of Jungkook, this question feels deeply personal. After seeing how the documentary, I Am Still, was able to move the global box office without massive promotion, many worry that the same pattern will repeat. Jungkook might shine again, generate numbers, and lift the company's image, but institutional recognition remains withheld. This is no longer about fandom ego, but about the career sustainability of an artist at the peak of world popularity. On the other hand, A new awareness is starting to grow among armies across various fandoms that this internal conflict, if left unchecked, will actually weaken BTS's position in the eyes of the industry. Many are starting to call for anger not to be directed at fellow fans, but to be focused on collective demands to HYBE, transparency in promotion, clarity in fund allocation, and a fair response to issues affecting every member have now become a shared agenda, no longer separate issues. HYBE stands at a crossroads. Silence may feel safe in the short term, but in the long term, this silence risks eroding the trust of the fandom that has been the main foundation of their success. Armies do not just buy albums and concert tickets, they also defend, promote, and build the global narrative of BTS. When they feel their voices are ignored, the impact cannot be underestimated, and in the end, the anger exploding over Jungkook's name is not just about one person. It is a symbol of a major shift in the K-pop industry, where financial data is now in the hands of the public, and fandoms no longer accept one-sided narratives. Figures in the trillions of won no longer belong solely to the company, but are the subject of public discussion filled with emotion and concern. Will HYBE answer all of this with openness, or choose to wait until the storm subsides on its own? And when BTS finally stands together on one stage, will the small wounds formed during this hiatus heal, or will they leave a deeper scar? One thing cannot be denied: ARMY has changed. They are now more critical, more aware, and bolder in questioning power. And as long as Jungkook continues to produce numbers, achievements, and history, the question will continue to echo. Who actually benefits, and who truly deserves more appreciation? In this evolving landscape, the relationship between artist, agency, and fandom is being renegotiated in real time. What once functioned on trust and loyalty now operates under scrutiny and data. Fans are no longer passive consumers. They read financial reports, question strategic silence, and connect patterns across years. Jungkook's case has become a reference point not because he stands alone, but because his trajectory exposes the cracks within a system that was never designed to handle individual power at this scale. The return of BTS, therefore, is not merely a comeback, it is a test. A test of whether HYBE can adapt to a fandom that demands accountability, and whether the agency can balance collective identity with individual acknowledgement without diminishing either. For ARMY, support is no longer unconditional. It is conscious, observant, and vocal. And in that shift lies both a risk and an opportunity. If handled with transparency, this moment could redefine trust.